welcome to the Art Museum of West Virginia University and our Lunchtime Looks program. I'm very happy to see you all here today. I know we're in a very small space, but it allows us to be closer to the works of art we want to see and to really get an experience with how those works of art come to be in this space. And to that end, I've invited my colleague Sam Boehm to join me here to talk about his work. So Sam Boehm joined the Art Museum in May as our exhibition coordinator. He is an alumni of the WVU BFA program, and he holds an MFA from the University of Delaware. He also has extensive experience in galleries with art handling, framing, matting, and the like. So we're very lucky to have him here today. As exhibition coordinator, he makes the magic happen. He gets all of these things in place so that they can be enjoyed by our public. Part of my impetus in asking Sam to speak to you here today is first to give a public introduction to some of our friends and supporters of our newest staff member, but also to give you all a behind-the-scenes look of how things work when the galleries are dark and we're getting ready for you to come and enjoy. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Sam. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Harris. Thanks for being here, everybody. I'm not great at this, but as I continue, I think it'll get smoother. So as Dr. Harris said, I'm the exhibition coordinator, which is sort of a vague title, but roughly what it means is down here at the museum, I install the shows, I move things around, I'm working on photographing the collection and that sort of thing. And then I also am sort of a one-man show up the hill in the Mesaros Galleries in the Canady Creative Arts Center, where I sort of wrangle the visiting artists and grad students and the juried student show and all of that sort of thing. So I guess I'll start with a little background. I graduated from here about 10 years ago. I studied under Joe Lupo in printmaking, and I later did my MFA at the University of Delaware. And since then, and between those things, I worked at a print shop. I managed a Boys and Girls Club here in town. I worked at a number of UPS stores, and then I moved to New York, where I worked as a fitter at a frame shop. And this was a frame shop that made frames from scratch for pretty major commercial galleries, institutions even, corporate collections, and it was there that I met a lot of people, and it was pretty formative, I would say. Also in New York, I worked as an art handler, freelance, and I took installation photos on the side because it was just something that was self-taught and that people needed. And eventually, I was asked to be the office manager for a psychiatrist on 57th Street and two psychologists, which is a separate story, but I met them through their love of art and their support of my own. So that was also pretty formative, but not super relevant. Then for various reasons, I moved back to Delaware, where I served as the cataloger at an auction house. I happen to know some things about modernist furniture, and that's mostly what they sold. So I sort of said, "Are you hiring? I know what things are." They said, "Yes, we are, and we'll take you." And then after COVID, or during COVID, sort of out of economic necessity, I worked for UPS. I became a UPS guy. And so I've done a little bit of everything. And then I landed back here. And what I learned the most in that decade or so was behind sort of every industry in the world is that there's all this organization and labor and people that are getting the thing done. And so I thought I would talk a little bit about that today. And I applied to work here specifically at the Art Museum because this is a resource that I would have loved to have had when I was a student here. It hadn't even broken ground, even though, what were we, 8 years? And this was 10 years ago that I graduated. So I'm a West Virginia native, and I have that similar pride and dreaminess that many mountaineers have, and this sort of fits that vision to have a flagship sort of art museum for the state and at the land-grant institution. I felt like it was somewhere that I should try to work, so I did. And then I have written in all caps here, segue. So we talk a lot about museums being exactly that, great learning resources for cultural enrichment, et cetera, and we talk about art being sort of an aesthetic and intellectual pursuit, which it is, all very important, and that's definitely the primary motivating factor for seeing art, I would say, and making art. And of course, as someone who has made steps in my career to serve exactly that, I completely agree. It's totally necessary. But I feel like much less is talked about is art as an industry. And it's one made up primarily of objects that have value, and most of the time a lot of value. And so I think art likes to see itself, if art is that's a blanket sort of thing, but art likes to see itself as something that exists outside of the market economy, and it's sort of smarter than that and more shiny. And that's not the case. Like everything, that's kind of how it functions. And so I sort of learned to see it as an industry that has people that are getting it done. And I would also say that at the same time, there seems to be still the consensus that there's value in seeing art in person rather than as a JPEG on a computer monitor. And so even still, what does that mean? It means that it requires people to put it places and store it and photograph it and build crates for it. And it requires there's a labor component and people have to get it done. So like in many industries, there's this whole industry behind the scenes that has sort of nothing to do with what you're looking at. And someone has to not only get the art to its place on the wall or on a pedestal, but they have to fabricate those pedestals. They have to make vitrines, movable walls, little shelves, supporting structures for masks and helmets and all of that sort of thing. And at the same time, sort of part of what art handlers and preparators and fabricators do is hide their own labor. And so that's kind of the idea, is that in the end, you're not going to sort of see any of this. We go to great lengths to make it sort of the white cube where the wall repairs, in a perfect world are perfect. You don't see them. You don't see the thing that's holding that up, for instance. It's just sort of is there for you to look at it. And it sort of creates the illusion that the objects live here permanently, which couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, the overwhelming majority of the time they're stored, they're packed away, oftentimes off-site across bodies of water in different towns. There's this whole physical component that isn't visible once you're looking at the art on the walls and on the pedestals and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to go over, I guess, a little bit of the background work and the labor and the tools and their implementation and some of what it takes to put together a show like The Thing Itself, which is a show about objects, mostly in 3 dimensions. So I thought, just as an example, I know we're facing this way, but a lot of you have seen the David Hicks in the middle of the room, pretty complex looking thing. And people have asked about the flowers and the nodes and that sort of thing, if they're stored separately, and they're not. The whole thing is on a skid that you can put on a flat dolly, and that is inside a crate with room around it. And like the 3 works that I'm going over, he's a living artist, and some sort of part of the fun of dealing with stuff like that is on the inside of the crate, his cell phone number is written on the inside of the crate, and it says, "Call with any questions, Dave." And then I thought I'd also go over the Serradze on the wall with the chads. kind of totally different in its storage. It's not in a big crate. It's actually not that complex to move around, but it comes folded up, and it comes in this box. And I thought that it would be fun to read some of the installation instructions, which as an art handler, we really appreciate having because most people don't have instructions. So, remove T-pins from drawer and slide drawer open. We've already done that. Remove long 31.5-inch ladder. So that's the ladder that hangs off of the work. Remove notepad piece from box by lifting the 2 tabs with arrows pointing up. Remove installation template from bottom of box and hang on the wall at desired height, at least 60 inches or higher. Install 2 screws inside the template. So the template is the size of the work. I'm not going to get it out for various reasons, but you more or less tape it with blue tape to the wall and put the screws where it says to put them. Remove notepad piece from foam core support. Hang, these are in quotes, notepad on the screws. Push pin top section to wall, and I thought it was interesting that she did not include the push pin. So we had to find one that was your typical push pin. We wanted to read it as a push pin, not a clear one, not a blue one, anything like that. Remove installation template, so then you take the template off the wall. Hang long ladder from lowest fire escape. So it's just got 2 little, you put it on. Sprinkle envelope of chads on floor below long ladder. So this is where curatorial and organizational decisions come into play. We have little kids come in here, school groups, we have the public, and although in a commercial gallery you could probably get away with sprinkling chads on the floor, you probably couldn't here, and it's probably not a good idea, and they'd get lost and all of that. So we came, as close as we could to the floor. So that's sort of one of those decisions that you have to make in exhibition design. And finally, I wanted to, in terms of examples, I wanted to talk about this Jacob Hashimoto. As you can see, the thing it's stored in and transported in is bigger and heavier and more unwieldy than the thing itself, which is light and airy and looks sort of delicate because it is. And I guess I wanted to kind of tell a story. And the story was that when I brought it from storage to be installed for the show, I think people were in various meetings and had obligations, and so I didn't really have anyone to ask. And it was me and Claire, the intern. Some of you might have met her recently. And we had to figure out how to get it down here. And usually crates are well marked, and this one happened to come from an auction house, and auction houses love to not put anything on things. They're not very good at, even though they'll have someone build a crate, they don't really do the whole job. And so I didn't have this way up or face or any of those sort of markers that are usually present for an art handler to judge it based on. It did have this, at least you could line the lid back up when you were done, but that was all I had. So we decided we didn't know which orientation it should face, and best practices say, when in doubt, just be very careful and move it according to how it was stored. And so that's what we did. It was facing, I didn't do it this way, so I didn't knock it over, but it is stored in storage upright on the tiny end. And so, and so getting it down here, a little unwieldy. We had to ratchet strap it to a hand truck and move it through storage and onto the elevator and and it's very heavy. The crate's very heavy, although the work weighs nothing, basically. And then we finally do all of that, get it down here and take the lid off and realize, again, I was going off a JPEG. I had never seen the work in person. The way it's tied to the wall is the way it's tied into the crate. So I could have brought it down here any way I wanted, basically, and it would have been fine. But best practices dictated that I was careful with it. And so I guess the moral of the story there is that there's all this sort of background stuff happening, and a lot of it is based off of what should you do, and asking the questions about how to be the most careful and cautious. And I always say that being an art handler or a preparator or an exhibition coordinator or any of that is like being a contractor, sort of having roughly the same skills, who also has an interest in, or at the very least understands, best practices in art. And so you have sort of this, it's a strange job because it involves labor and moving things around and understanding drywall and plywood and those sorts of things, but also enjoying art, or at least having an interest or caring enough to want to work in that instead. And so, roughly speaking, that's what I've got. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, Sam. I already see a hand in the air for questions, so I am going to move the microphone around because we are recording. Did something happen? The microphone is on.
You want mine?
Hello?
Jason.
Jason started this setup, speaking of labor and invisible labor, he started the setup by saying, I have made this idiot-proof so people can't turn it on and off. So, congratulations, I have failed the idiot-proof test. But what I was saying is Jason is recording for the live stream for YouTube, so I am going to pass the microphone to those who have questions.
Thanks for the presentation. Instructions, that's where I'm going with this.
Sure.
So if this came with no instructions,
Right.
and I heard what you said about best practice is, well, if it's stored that way, that's the way we move it. If you were to pass this on into another gallery for their presentation, would you add instructions?
I would. Yeah, there's actually sort of a, I don't know what you would say, it's like an unwritten sort of courtesy rules in art handling. And a lot of it, if you think about framed things or things that come wrapped or works on paper, we even have like courtesy tabs on the tape. So you don't tape things flat, you put a little fold over so that when you get the things, the next guy can unwrap it in a way that's intuitive. And so the more that you can get something to be intuitive when you pass it along to the next place, that's kind of the idea. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just curious, is the piece of art solid?
Yeah, it is. So it's solid back here.
I was wondering because, like you said, you didn't know which end was up. If it was, if it was put then upside down, so to speak,
Oh,
the
sure.
whole thing would just kind of crumple on itself. Is that right, or is that not what happened?
I don't think that's exactly it because there's tension on both ends.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
so. It's not exactly gravity
So it's not
that's
hanging
holding it
free,
up.
in other words.
No, right.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
okay,
it
I
is
see.
tied into both ends,
Yeah.
and it was marked in some capacity which way was up, and I can't recall how that was. Yeah, maybe the signature.
Yeah.
There was some way to interpret which way was up, and so then you know which way it goes back in its
Yeah, and then
crate.
my before you even talked about that, I was just how do you open a crate like that?
So usually a crate, the screws, it's just drywall screws in plywood most of the time, and it's you unscrew it to they usually go in the cross grain of this piece of wood, so the side of the crate, and the screws go in that way. The overwhelming majority of the time, that's the case. Where whether it's a painting or a sculpture, they go into outside of the work, and there's always a lot of room around the work. Usually, it has archival foam supports that are like supporting the various sort of fragile parts of it. That's sort of how you go about building a crate. You do its outside dimensions plus a lot, and then build toward the object.
Circled?
What's that?
Are the drywall screws circled so we know which ones to take out on this crate?
Yeah, so they are not on this one, and that's the other funny thing. Sometimes a crate will come to you with only 4 screws into it because the last place took the rest of them and didn't put them back, and it only needs 4 to hold it on anyway. So there are all these kind of funny things you run into that sort of tell the history of where a thing has been.
As a student here, as an art student or whatever your major might or focus might be, do they teach you about things like this, storage and shipping and?
No, generally speaking, they don't teach you one thing about it, which is why I sought it out. Yeah, and again, this is the museum, this being the museum, is just something that I really would have enjoyed having as a student. I think it's a great resource, and I think that shift toward teaching, whether it's artists who want to make things for their own work, supporting structures or learning how shipping works and that sort of thing, or whether it's museum studies sorts of students. I'm liking that there's a shift toward hands-on skills and the things that actually apply in the industry and aren't, again, the loftier side of things. I mean, there is this entire supporting structure that we don't talk enough about, I think.
Yeah, and just as a plug, Sam has also given a very kind of similar talk to my introductory museum studies course, so that students start to get these understandings, and I think there's some future possibility of having some more of those hands-on courses as we develop museum professions as integrated into the art history degree. Because he actually brought out one of the big crates that the big Nina Chanel Abney pieces were shipped in, the ones that are on loan to us. So that's something coming into us. And do you want to tell them a little bit about like kind of how those float in space? Because I think our students found that really interesting.
Yeah, so again, as a learning research, I got to take those out of their crates with the intern in the summer. And I mean, to have that opportunity, this is stuff coming from Pace in New York. I mean, just a really valuable thing. But anyway, those crates being large, they're not paintings, but we call those sorts of things paintings. Large, mostly two-dimensional works on the wall. Crates for paintings usually are, again, the same thing. You have to have room on all 4 sides. It's not like it sits against any side of the crate. There's always something sort of holding it in the air. And in the case of when you start to get into works with that much value, they actually have invented a piece of hardware on the back of the works that folds out, called there are other names, but the industry standard is the Oz clip, which was invented in Australia. And it serves as both the D-ring on the back of the painting with which you hang it, but also has a mechanism that folds out and has holes where it ties into the crate, sort of like this ties into the back of the crate. So you pack the paintings flat and have those clips folded out. It ties into the crate and then has those supporting foam blocks. So again, like every object has this custom supporting structure.
Can you talk a little bit about the leper and how
Yeah,
this one?
so the leper, Bob kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, before I worked here, Bob kind of came up with this method to view it, not in the round, but understanding that it's something that can be viewed in the round and is in 3 dimensions, even though it's, roughly speaking, a 2-dimensional work with a plane. And so we decided to hang it from cable, and it had been displayed like that before. The difficulty is that to hang it at viewing height, which is usually 60 inches on center, ceilings have different heights. And so every time we display it, we have to custom cut and crimp wire that goes into the ceiling appropriately at the right height. And although you can get the wire cut and crimped to an exact length, it turns out that objects are not always square, and so they want to do their own thing, especially something that's based on some aluminum dowels with wire. So it just wants to shift, so that it takes a lot of finagling to get it level, and there's more work in that display method than say having something that comes off the wall for it to hang on that.
Any other questions for Sam? Okay.
So I don't know that Heather told you, but I brought, 50 students into this space recently, and I had not prepared myself for the work on the wall with the tiny spicks of whatever was on the ground. The chads. Okay. I got very nervous that one of my students had actually touched this thing and it had just disintegrated. But the work is very fragile. So
It
is there an element that references what could happen to that piece? And in thinking about kind of, I don't know, living artists or like people who are working in this moment, the fragility of something like paper.
Sure,
What do
yeah.
we do in thinking about curation of really fragile, delicate objects?
Yeah, I mean, so everything comes down to best practices, and I would say in that work, there's a component, there's an idea of that, because those chads, going on what she called them, those are the components that are cut out of the thing on the wall, and so there is that idea of a notepad and something that's it's just paper, and then it's cut in such a way that you see what existed as a whole, on the ground. And I like everything, it will have like sort of an expiration date, and that's another thing about art handling and being the stewards of objects like this, is that we sort of do our best to maintain them and pretend like they'll exist into eternity, and that's not the case. I mean, eventually things degrade, and I think there's definitely a reference to that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, please join me in thanking Sam again for his time. I hope you enjoyed this behind-the-scenes glimpse. Please, of course, go see that object that is kind of around the corner that we've been talking a lot about. This Sunday from 2 to 4 is our Family and Community Day. If you have any young people in your life that you would like to steer this direction for scavenger hunts and hot cocoa and art making in our education center, we would love to see you there and share widely with young people you might know. We will have the final iteration of the year and the semester of Lunchtime Looks on Friday, December 1st. And we look forward to seeing you all then. All right. Thank you all
Thanks,
very
everybody.
much.